The Maui Invitational did not disappoint on day one, arguably the greatest individual day in Maui tournament history.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host today, Andy Patton, joined by our regular guest, Leif Thulin, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, Monday through Friday, 52 weeks out of the year. Want to give a special shout out to our everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord channel, and remind you all that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College, and you will get $20 off your first purchase. Well, we have a full show of Maui recaps, predictions for upcoming games. We're talking UConn's loss to Memphis. We're talking about major comeback wins for Auburn over Iowa State and North Carolina over Dayton in the nightcap. We also got some previews for Tuesday's games in the Players Era Festival, a massive game between Kansas and Duke, all sorts of stuff to get to today. Leif, let's start with what was the probably most exciting. I don't know. It's hard to say what was the most exciting game. 3 of the 4 Maui games truly delivered on Monday, but we got to start with Memphis, UConn. The Tigers picking up an overtime victory. It shouldn't have even been that complicated. They were up 10 with 2.5 minutes to go. Then it looked like Penny Hardaway's team was going to do what we've seen Penny Hardaway's team do quite frequently. They looked like they were going to blow this one. They did not foul despite being up 3 with 6 seconds to go. Solo ball hits a 3, sends this game into overtime. There's a double technical on Samson Johnson and Dane Danger. There was constant talk to the officials from Danny Hurley. Finally, a foul called on Liam McNeely with 40 seconds left in a tie game in overtime causes Hurley to get a technical foul. Memphis makes all 4 free throws. They ultimately win this game. Leif, there are about 100 different directions we could go talking about this basketball games. Where do you want to start looking at this result here?
I'll start with a kind of twofold direction here, and it directly resulted in how the game went, aside from the craziness that was the overtime.
Mm-hmm.
One, I don't think UConn's all that great yet. They can still be really good. I want to reiterate that. But when we do our AP polls, I haven't had them higher than 7 or 8 in all the weeks, despite them being number 2 in the AP poll. My rationale being they played absolutely no one. They're straight to schedules in the 350s. But when you watch them play, they're missing 2 critical factors that they've had in the championship seasons. They're missing a 7'2" rim protector in Donovan Clingan. I know you could say, wait a minute, Adama Sanogo was 6'8", and he wasn't the rim protector. That doesn't change the fact that Clingan was still on that roster, and you can play him in. And then they're also missing the calm of guard play. People complained about Tristan Newton his first year and how inconsistent he was. But that said, you had Andre Jackson, Andre Jackson could alleviate some of that pressure and be a distributor. Well, right now, Aiden Mahaney, who you and I have both seen plenty of, being from the West Coast, both of us, he doesn't fit quite what they like to run, and he's being overwhelmed by the pressure. And then defensively, he's really struggled. And then the second part of this, because maybe they're not as prominent as to college basketball as UConn, but Memphis has the backcourt shot makers that can win you any given game. And that's what they did. They were excellent. Tyrese Hunter took over the game, and Memphis should have won in regulation due to Tyrese Hunter's brilliance. PJ Haggerty hit some difficult shots. And then when UConn made that run, including that amazing three-pointer from Solo Ball, which I want to say this, Memphis should have fouled. You always should foul up 3. And it happened in North Carolina too. They just got lucky that the big toe was on the line. But I digress. You look at the shot making, they won the game in overtime, but they were up and they were dominating the game first half and second half because they had better shot making guards, whereas UConn's offense is what was creating shots. And they actually shot pretty decently. It just was not as good as the shot making and creation of Memphis, and their ball pressure actually won them the game. So I'm actually really impressed by Memphis. I had them ranked at 25, admittedly, so not really that high, but in the top 25. And they solidified that by beating a team that everyone seemed to think was invincible. And you saw the heart of the champion, as they say, as they battled back, and it looked like they were going to win in overtime. And then Danny Hurley is going to steal all the headlines with an ill-advised temper tantrum, which admittedly I thought was a bad call. I thought Nick McNeely got that. It should have been a putback, but you can't get a technical there. And I thought the deserved winner won the game in Memphis.
Yeah. I was kind of split on the call. They showed some replays and there was some contact. I think it's probably not a call you should make as an official. Like, I think that's kind of the conclusion I came to, but none of that really matters because Danny can't react that way. I think that's everybody kind of is in consensus on that. I did not like that Hurley had post-game comments saying like, you can't officiate back-to-back national champions like that. It's like, that doesn't matter. Like, and I think that's like, this team has been gassed up and has been so high in the AP rankings because of what they did last year and because of what they did 2 years ago. And I don't think that should be taken away from them. And I don't think it should not be a factor at all. Like, I think, this roster is not as good as a top 5 team or a top 6 or 7 team. They're kind of in that range, but I give them a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because I know this team's going to come together and Danny's going to find the ways to make it work because he's a great coach. But they were getting a lot of hype based on last year, and then now Danny's saying stuff like, oh, we can't be officiated this way. It's like, yeah, like, look, you played the first good team you've played all year and you got punched in the mouth and you found a way to crawl back into this game. You outcoached Penny down the stretch to get your team into overtime. Like, that's a really good result for a good team. And I think, I'm not super worried about this UConn team going forward. I still think they're the best team in the Big East. I still think they're going to get a super high seed. I still think they're going to make a good run in the tournament and can be a Final Four national champion contender, but they're not there right now. And I mean, the broadcasters talked about it. Like, Memphis just isolated Aiden Mahaney and went at him every single time to the point where he was kind of unplayable in the second half of that game. That's a problem for UConn because they don't have the shot blockers, the erasers down low to kind of mitigate some of those concerns from perimeter defenders. And yeah, I think Memphis's backcourt is very good offensively. Tyrese Hunter and PJ Haggerty is pretty good, but they're going to face some good scoring backcourts in conference play. They're going to face some good scoring backcourts in the non-conference. They're playing Baylor, they're playing Texas, they're playing Gonzaga, and then they're playing, Xavier and St. John's and Marquette and Creighton and all these teams that have good creators, good scorers in the backcourt in particular. And I'm curious to see how UConn responds to this because they had some really solid performances. I was incredibly impressed with Terrace Reed. He looked phenomenal in this game, and that's not a player who looked nearly this good when he was at Michigan. 22 points, 11 rebounds, 10 of 13 from the field for him. I loved watching Terrace Reed go to work. I loved the way that UConn got him the basketball. One of my favorite aspects of this game was the battle between Terrace Reed and Dane Danger in the front court. Danger also came off the bench for Memphis, 14-5, 7 of 10 from the field. It was kind of an old school throwback, early 2000s post battle between those two guys. So I'm with you on all your points. I think Memphis is a good team. I think they deserve some credit for this. And it's not just, oh, UConn blew it. It's Memphis won. They went out and got a W against a really good team. Whereas UConn, yeah, they got some stuff to work on. They're still going to be there, but I think they were a little extra inflated in the preseason, which has made this loss feel more dramatic than I think it really is. It's a good team losing to another good team, and I think both of them will be fine going forward.
But I don't know if it's necessarily more dramatic other than the fact of how it ended in the sense of, oh, Dan Hurley's blowing this out of proportion. He got a technical at 92-92, and it's a close loss. But if you watch the game from start to finish like you and I did, I feel as if they were outplayed the entire game. You would look at the stat sheet and it said 40-40 after one, and whatever the score was going into overtime, and you'd be like, well, it was dead even. Well, they had to fight their way to tie both halves. Yeah. And Mahaney was unplayable, and he really was unplayable. He was getting killed. Samson Johnson was horrible. He was absolutely awful. He might have been worse than Mahaney. Every time he touched the ball, it would fall out of his hands, and every time he would be on the court, he'd pick up a foul. Part of that was the perimeter defense not being good. But I don't think those are fixable in the senses of their foul trouble. I mean, they were saddled with foul trouble. Even McNeely, Mahaney, Johnson, Solo Ball, all those guys got foul trouble. And they stayed alive because they got great looks, feeding through Caravan's intelligence. He got the ball to Stewart, who kept them alive. He had 14 in the first half. I don't know if that's sustainable. So my greater concern is not that they lost. It's that a couple of the players that they figured to be top 7, top 8 rotational players, and in this case, starters thus far in the season, I don't think are playable against big-time opponents because they will be hunted. Now, you talk about Baylor and Gonzaga. I'm not all that impressed by Baylor. In fact, I don't think they're that great right now and may not be by the end of the season. But Gonzaga, I think, is really, really good. Nemhard is going to kill Mahaney. They know exactly what Mahaney's all about, and now you can expose him because he's not playing that slow pace that Randy Bennett plays. So I think UConn's got some real issues. Yes, are they fixable because they have a lot of talent? But now if Hassan Diarra is all of a sudden your starter, I don't know if you have the depth that UConn's prided themselves on and the rim protection that they've had a two-headed monster, which has made them so hard to play because you don't get a drop-off from 1 to 2. I'm a little worried about UConn in terms of the grand scheme. Not this loss, but I think they're a Sweet 16 team. I don't think they're an Elite Eight or a Final Four team.
Well, we don't have to spend a lot of time on Colorado, Michigan State. Michigan State won. We expected them to win. They crushed Colorado on the boards. They won despite shooting, and I thought this was a typo at first on ESPN, 2 of 21, 9.5% from three. Tom Izzo found a way to win a game where his team shoots that horribly from three is pretty quintessential Tom Izzo. Colorado also shot pretty poorly. I just don't think Colorado's a very good team. But what that means is it sets up Tuesday's games here, Memphis, Michigan State. That game will be at 6 p.m. Eastern time on ESPN. And then UConn taking on Colorado at 3:30 p.m. on ESPN2. Leif, who do you got in either of those two games?
I think I'm taking Memphis, and then I think UConn's going to destroy Colorado. Here's a stat for you. 364th, the Spartans 3-point percentage. Memphis second. So that you can't get too far apart. I'm going Memphis, but I don't like picking against Izzo. No matter the circumstances, I just don't like picking against Izzo.
Yeah, Michigan State favored right now, but I think I'm leaning Memphis. I think they're a more talented roster right now, and that's not to knock Michigan State. They have a lot of talent on their roster as well. I think Memphis' three-point shooting is going to get them a W there. And then, I don't think we need to talk much on UConn, Colorado. A pissed-off Danny Hurley and a pissed-off UConn team going up against a Colorado roster that just doesn't look all that good this year. I think is going to finish at or near the bottom of the Big 12. I think UConn rolls in that one. So we got our first two predictions for Tuesday's games, and we're going to talk about the rest of the Maui Invitational. Incredible comebacks from both North Carolina, who was down 21 against Dayton, and Auburn, who was down 18 against Iowa State. Just two more crazy games happening in Hawaii. We're going to talk about those games and what it means for the rest of this tournament coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the college basketball season is here, and there's nothing better than the atmosphere of a college basketball game. The anticipation of what's about to happen, the energy of the crowd, the unexpected coming to life. We saw a lot of that on Monday, thrilling wins, and more. And Game Time has a new feature now called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching for thousands of different tickets. And it's not just basketball. They have tickets for concerts, for comedy shows, for theater, and more. And whether it's Game Time's ticketing coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app, Game Time has got you covered. We're about to talk about this in the final segment. Tickets for the first session of the Players Era Festival at the MGM Garden Grand in Las Vegas. It starts tonight, and you can still get tickets. It features Alabama versus Houston, that first session does, and you can get them for $41 in Section 18. That's the lower bowl at the MGM Garden Grand. Tickets for $40 to see Alabama and Houston. That is an incredible deal. So, folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, still Andy Patton, still joined by Leif Thulin, and we're still talking about the first day of the Maui Invitational. Maui Monday was an incredible stretch of games. Michigan State, Colorado was the only game that wasn't interesting, and most people would have probably projected that to be the case. I think some might have thought that North Carolina Dayton wasn't going to end up all that interesting, but I'll tell you what, our host, Isaac Shade, who's also the host of Locked On Tar Heels, he was banging the drum saying, I think Dayton might beat North Carolina. He wasn't quite right, but boy, was that one close. We are going to start, though, with the first game out of those two, Auburn, Iowa State, a game that people were stunned and sad to see be a first-round game. I don't know how they didn't get Auburn taken on Colorado and then Michigan State, Iowa State. Seems like that would have been better, but hey, I'm happy we got this game anyway. Auburn down 18 at one point. Being down 18 and coming back to win is impressive in its own right, but being down 18 to a team like Iowa State to come back and win that game is incredible. Johni Broome was fantastic, 20-10 for him, including that game-winning tip-in. Chad Baker-Mazara had 16 of his 18 in the second half. This was just an extraordinary performance from Bruce Pearl's team. To me, they look like the strongest team in the Maui Invitational. I felt confident about that going in. I was surprised to see their odds be so much lower than UConn's. I know it was because they had a tougher bracket, but at this point, they're my clear favorite to win this thing after this massive comeback against Iowa State.
Yeah, I would have taken Auburn ahead of it. I didn't want to make the bet, and funnily enough, Memphis plus 30,000 or sorry, 3,000.
Yeah,
3,000. I was thinking to myself, the numbers didn't make sense, but that would have been the interesting line.
Yeah.
But you don't want to bet against Connecticut, so I left it untouched. But I'm looking through my predictions. So I have a friend who's from SEC country. He's a Gators fan, so he really hates Auburn. But I keep telling him, like, man, I think Auburn's really good this year. And he's like, well, they're kind of boom or bust because, you know, they get hot and cold, but when they're hot, you can't really play them. So the game starts, and I say I'm so surprised by how Auburn's undisciplined. Like the baskets that Iowa State was scoring were not the loose rim Maui, you know, it's just going to rattle. And no, they were getting dunks, they were getting layups, and they were just disorganized. They were unorganized. They wouldn't get back after even makes. They had turnovers, and yet I still felt like Auburn had a chance. I don't know about you, but the whole time I kept thinking, oh, well, what's 18 points at 41-23? I still think this is going to be a really close ball game because all Auburn has to do is not turn the ball over, and I have the utmost faith they can defend. And then you start hitting a few shots. So Tahad Pettiford right out of the break hits a three. And I texted my friend, the line's plus 10 right now. I think that's a slam. I might take Auburn to win. I decided not to, but I really thought about it. And then the funniest thing is they cut it to 10. I say Auburn's going to win this because they score more easily. Iowa State was scoring easily in the beginning of this game because of Auburn's mistakes. If Auburn doesn't make mistakes, they've got more hard shot makers than Iowa State. I think they're going to win. And then they get up 5, and you get the weird flagrant foul play that I didn't think was a flagrant foul. I think that's a bad call, and that changed the course of the game. But the reason I bring up those texts is Auburn looks to me the type of team that's not out of any game. And they used to be that, okay, they could play their A game and they could beat you, but they don't necessarily have the weapons to score. Right now, they have Johni Broome on the interior. They have the supplementary defender in Cardwell who makes it hard to score on them when they're set. And then they have the streaky players like Miles Kelly, like Chad Baker-Mazara. They haven't had those type of guys in recent years. And you could point to even the Final Four team, but that Final Four team was so Jared Harper and Bryce Brown driven. They didn't really necessarily have the wing guys. You could look at Samir Dowdy, but he wasn't established then. He was better the next 2 years. So I think this team's got more weapons than any Bruce Pearl coached Auburn team. And I haven't even talked about their ultimate weapon, which is Tahad Pettiford. He played Houston. He had 21. He played Iowa State, who's one of the other best defensive teams in the country. They'll both finish top 5 defensively in the country. I guarantee it on KenPom, those two teams. Well, he had 35 combined in those 2 games as a freshman and 2 of his 5 first games in his career. I think Houston is not quite as good as Auburn, and I don't think Iowa State's quite as good as Auburn because Auburn can contend with them defensively, but Houston doesn't have the way to rise up offensively like Auburn does. So I say all that to say this. Auburn's the real deal, and I don't think they played well in that game and still beat a top 5 team that I think is the real deal as well.
Yeah, that's that perfect summary. I think Tahad Pettiford is such a weapon for them to have. I mean, a lot of the excitement about this team coming into the year was the additions of Miles Kelly, who has been good. He was 2 of 9 from 3 in this game, but again, you're playing a
he
top
needs to step forward. He shoots them from 2 deep.
Yeah, he does. He's the NBA 3-point shooter. And then JP Pegues, who a lot of people were excited about, who hasn't really been a big-time contributor yet. He didn't score in this game. He only played 13 minutes. But for Pettiford to get 14 in 19 minutes of action against a top-flight defense is just an incredible accomplishment for him. This team is I think you're right. They're not out of any game. And if they can stage a comeback against a team like Iowa State, who I'm not overly concerned about, you're never happy about a team blowing a big lead like that. But I think the Cyclones are going to be fine. Taman Lipsey wasn't great in this game. He only had 6 points, but Keyshawn Gilbert had 23. Curtis Jones had 14. The bigs looked solid. Like, I'm not super concerned about Iowa State, but I think if anything, and we're going to preview this Kansas Duke game to close out the show, but if Duke wins and Kansas loses, we'll see how the rest of the week goes, but there's a decent chance I'll have either Auburn or Gonzaga at number 1 this upcoming week. And both teams potentially will really deserve it because Auburn's playing some great basketball right now. Leif, I want to move on, though, talk about the nightcap, Dayton, North Carolina, a game that Dayton had a 21-point lead in the second half of this game. They were up 18 at halftime, pushed it to 21. North Carolina stormed all the way back, wins this one 92-90, outscored the Flyers by 20, 59 points in the second half for Hubert Davis's team. It was a odd game. North Carolina had a ton of turnovers, but they also shot it pretty well when they were getting their shots off. We know that North Carolina is a backcourt-driven team, and that was very clear. On Monday, RJ Davis had 30. He also had 7 rebounds, 5 assists. He was 8 of 19 from the field, 10 of 11 from the free throw line. Seth Trimble has been a revelation for this team so far in the early going, 27 and 10 for him on 10 of 14 shooting. But again, the same issue for North Carolina. The bigs, they're just not offering much. They're decent defensively, but offensively, the trio of Jalen Washington, Jalen Withers, and Van Allen Lubin, they combined for 12 points. The three of them, 12 points, 9 rebounds combined. They're just not getting enough oomph from that front court to have those kind of numbers against a smaller Dayton team. Deron Holmes is not with the Flyers anymore. They don't have that kind of big, impactful player. And so I'm still concerned about North Carolina's front court. I don't think that concern's going away anytime soon, but hats off to Hubert and the Tar Heels for coming back and getting a win here.
Yeah, I think it's impressive that they showed character. It was similar to the way they played Kansas. They were being schooled, and they fought back and made it a ball game. And this time they won because Dayton's not as good as Kansas.
Right.
Dayton actually plays a better brand of offense now that Holmes isn't there because they almost ran too much through them. But let's get back to the Tar Heels. I've got a take, and tell me if you think this is crazy. I think Seth Trimble's better than RJ Davis.
I think it's a little crazy, but I think there's a rationale for it. I think Seth Trimble, they're different players in a lot of ways. And Davis, he's not Caleb Love. He's more efficient than that, but he's a bit more inconsistent. Whereas if Trimble's more Trimble was really efficient in this game. I could see him being a more impactful player.
He plays two ways. And he rebounds. He had 27, but he rebounded the ball at critical junctures, and he finds avenues to score that aren't created and don't take forever. RJ Davis, I've said this to Isaac off air, and I'll say it. I think he's the least impactful All-American, and he's obviously really, really good. But the reason I bring that up is you have 6 foot, maybe 6'2" guards if you want to put Trimble as a little bit taller, but he's not very big. And so you make scoring difficult for all those guys. I think Cadeau's awesome. I think Trimble's awesome. I think RJ Davis is awesome. But Carolina makes it really difficult upon themselves to score, and it's incumbent they get extra possessions. And that's where their lack of oomph, as you said, in terms of Washington, in terms of Withers, in terms of Tyson, in terms of Van Allen Lubin, they don't have it on the interior. So they make scoring so important for those three. I think the reason they won this game is Drake Powell came out and defended in the second half, and he hit 2 big threes. But I just don't think the Tar Heels are good enough to have a margin for error for bad nights from RJ Davis. Even if Seth Trimble's great, even if Elliot Cadeau's great, I just don't think the Tar Heels have much of a margin for error this year, and they make it too hard upon themselves. So I'm stamping them the pretenders. That said, I really like watching them play because I love guard-oriented basketball. So I think they're a little one-dimensional. I'm not really high on them, but I am impressed by their resilience thus far.
So the Tuesday results, or the Tuesday games here that we're going to see: Dayton, Iowa State, North Carolina, Auburn. I'll give you the times: 8:30 p.m. Eastern time for Dayton, Iowa State. That's going to be on ESPNU, and then 11 p.m. Eastern time, which is a bummer for the two teams on the East Coast, North Carolina and Auburn. That game will be on ESPN. I'm taking Auburn over North Carolina, and I'm not sure it's going to be that close. I will see if North Carolina can try to mount a comeback if they get down, something they've done successfully once against Dayton and almost successfully, like you mentioned, against Kansas. But it's going to be an interesting one because Auburn's pretty front court dominant. They have good guards as well, like we said, but their best players are in the front court, whereas North Carolina, obviously the opposite. But give me Auburn by 10 or so. I think they're going to win this one fairly handily. And then give me Iowa State over Dayton. I think Dayton was always going to be in a tough spot here because they were going to have to play either Auburn or Iowa State regardless. Again, I think Dayton's a pretty good team, and I think they're going to come out of this thing probably with one win because I think they'll beat either Colorado or whoever they play in the other game there. But I think Auburn and Iowa State win these two games.
I'm with you. I think Auburn is probably the spread I like the most in terms of our little gambling part of it. I think they're going to win. And then I think Dayton can be troublesome for Iowa State in the sense of they can hit tough shots. I just don't know if they hit the same shots they were hitting in North Carolina, because I think the swarming defense is going to take them out of the offense, and they're not going to step into threes. They're going to shoot hard shots. So I'm going to say Iowa State wins comfortably. If they shoot well, it could be a game, because Iowa State's, like I said, not an electric offense. But yeah, give me the Cyclones.
Well, the Players Era Festival gets underway in Las Vegas today. Who do we think is going to win the first games of this inaugural event? And we got to talk Kansas Duke, the biggest standalone game of the week and possibly of the season. All that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to tackle the NFL action this season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And right now, the Maui odds have, of course, changed dramatically. Auburn, the favorite, at -130. North Carolina is next at +260, followed by Michigan State at +600. And Memphis, who, as Leif mentioned, was +3,000. They are now at +650. If you like any of those odds, you like the odds for Battle for Atlantis coming up or the Players Festival. If you're listening before those games get going, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. All right, Leif, closing out the show with some predictions, getting us ready for the slate of games on Tuesday. And we're going to talk Players Era. We're going to talk Kansas Duke. But we also want to quickly mention the Sunshine Slam event, which happened on Monday. Clemson beat San Francisco 70-55 in that first game. It was USF had a 5-point lead at halftime, 20-2 run to start the second half by Clemson, buried the Dons. Penn State beats Fordham by 19. Nick Kern had 20 and 13 off the bench for the Nittany Lions. Both teams shot it pretty ugly. I don't want to get too far into the games, but do want to look at how we think this championship will play out. Penn State taking on Clemson, 4 Eastern time on the CBS Sports Network. And then the third place game will be at 1:30 Eastern between Fordham and San Francisco. Leif, quickly, how do you think these 4 teams are going to rank out in the Sunshine Slam this year?
I think Penn State's better than Clemson. So I'll go Penn State, Clemson, San Francisco, Fordham.
Yep. I think Penn State Clemson's a close one. I could see Brad Brunell and the Tigers winning, but I think Penn State is probably my favorite there. And then, I think San Francisco beats Fordham. Let's move on. Players Era Festival. We got 4 games that are taking place on Tuesday. I'm going to read them out to y'all, let you know the times, where you can watch them on TV, and then Leif, I'll toss it to you to pick a game or two that you want to focus on. I think there is one game that sort of stands out among the rest of these 4. Start San Diego State taking on Creighton, 2 Eastern time at the MGM Garden Grand. They're all at the MGM Garden Grand. We'll just say that. That game is on TBS, followed by Oregon versus Texas A&M, 4:30 Eastern time on TNT. Houston versus Alabama, 8 Eastern time on Max. And then Rutgers versus Notre Dame, 10:30 Eastern time on TBS. Leif, what's the game here that you want to talk about?
I just can't wait about college basketball.
Yeah.
I think all those are awesome. Like if you tell me that Creighton, San Diego State play typically, I'm over the moon.
Yeah.
But you look at the Players Classic, and that's where you got to go. Like the new era stuff.
Yeah.
And I can't wait for probably 8 of these games are games I would watch on their own and say, this is an awesome game. But you got to look at some of the teams that are playing later at night. I am intrigued by Texas A&M and Oregon too. Yeah. But I think it's more because I just don't know what to expect. Like I couldn't really give you a good preview. I think Texas A&M's the better team right now, but Oregon's got a lot of talent. But man, I want to talk about the big guns. I want to talk about the teams that we ranked in our top 5s coming into it, and where I think the games will change. If you were to tell me that you get Duke, Kansas, and Houston, Alabama on the same day, I'd tell you that this could be a Final Four.
Yeah. That
said, I think one of these teams is the odd one out, and I don't think it's the one people would expect me to think it is.
Ooh. Is it Bama?
No.
Duke?
No.
Well, then it's definitely not a team I'd expect. Oh, Kansas.
No, I think it's Houston.
I could not have guessed more poorly in that, could I have? Talk to me about Houston, then.
Okay, so here, let me give you my take. I don't think this is going to become a shock as this season goes, and I reserve the right to change it if I see fit down the road. But I think there are 5 teams that are better than everyone else. I think it's Gonzaga, and this is no particular order. I think it's Gonzaga. I think it's Kansas. I think it's Duke. I think Auburn has put themselves in a position to be there, but I don't think they're as talented as the other team. And then I'd say it's Alabama. So those are my 5 best teams. Here's the reason. No matter how any of those teams play, they'll manufacture enough chances to score. Defensively, they both have individually talented defenders, but their teams are very good defensively. Now, what changes this for Houston? They're obviously excellent defensively, but they don't have the individual players that can make a way to score. Houston, I was skeptical that they would coming into the season, but Johni Broome has figured a way to be put in spots to score, and then they have Tahad Pettiford. Houston's best player is LJ Cryer at that, but I don't think LJ Cryer is an individual scorer. And that's where they fell short against Auburn. Houston may well win the Big 12. They may well make an Elite 8. I don't think they have Final Four juice this year, barring an opened path. I just don't think LJ Cryer and Sharp are individually talented scorers. And they lost Jamal Shed, who I don't think was a talented scorer, but man, he had heart. He could will your way to winning a game. So I'll go to those games now. I think Kansas and their experience probably beats Duke, despite Duke being a favorite right now, because of one thing. KJ Adams is the perfect antidote to Cooper Flagg. He is strong. He is physical. He is not going to be overwhelmed by Flagg's speed. And though he doesn't have the length prototypically that you'd put on Flagg, he's got the girth and tenacity and experience to guard Cooper Flagg. And I think Con Knippel's been sped up a couple times. And by Arizona, he was sped up by a couple players, Carter Bryant and KJ Lewis. I think you have the horses on Kansas and Ryland Griffin to speed him up. I think AJ Storr, if he's dialed in, could do so as well. And then you look at what Caleb Foster's going to be dealing against. He's going to be against DeJuan Harris. So I think Flagg being mitigated. He may still be great because I think he's the best player in college basketball. I want to say that again. I think Cooper Flagg's the best player in college basketball. But I think he's going to have a mitigated impact due to KJ Adams' brilliance. DeJuan Harris is also going to pester the point guard. It's going to be harder. So they need someone to step up. Is it going to be Con? I think it might be difficult because Bill Self can really scheme. And then the flip side is, can Dickinson score efficiently against Khaman Maluach? Well, the issue there for Duke, if you're looking at this, is Khaman Maluach can't stay on the court. Whether it's an injury, it's a cramp, foul trouble, I think somehow Self is going to scheme Maluach off the court. And though Malik Brown's an excellent player, doesn't have the size to stop Dickinson. I think Zeke Mayo, Ryland Griffin, those type of guys can score. Though I haven't been that impressed with Kansas this far this season, they're my number 1 team in the country because they have all the recipes. And Alabama has not been good this far. Like ranking-wise, they're 10-ish, they're 8-ish. But in terms of talent and why I say they're a top 5 team in the country is they've gotten unbelievably good looks. If you looked at shot quality, they're top 5 in the country. And then they're eventually going to make some, and they have the size to deal with Houston's physicality. Do they have the toughness? I'm not so sure. But if you were to tell me that this game was happening in March, I'd confidently bet on Alabama. Alabama is +4 right now, so I'm riding with the underdogs. I think these teams are the more skilled teams. Not that Duke's not skilled, but I think right now they have the better mix of skill, experience, and what shots they're going to generate, because we saw Duke struggle to generate great shots against Kentucky, and I think this team in Kansas is better than that Kentucky team.
Yeah, I think for me, the big matchup is going to be in the front court. I think you're absolutely right that Flagg and Adams is the biggest matchup of the game. I think Kansas has the right personnel to match up with Duke's young players more than possibly any other team in the country, just because I think Adams is such a perfect, as you said, a perfect antidote to Flagg. I like that. And I think the big one is going to be the bigs, Maluach versus Hunter Dickinson, and whether Dickinson can get him in foul trouble, get him on the bench, get Malik Brown in the game where you can probably take a better advantage of him down on the block just because he's not as big. That to me feels like a really critical matchup in this game, because I don't think Duke doesn't really have the offense to necessarily try to play Dickinson off the floor the way that like Gonzaga did last year in the NCAA tournament, where you can just like get him in pick and rolls and go at him that way. Like Duke could do that, but I'm not sure if that's the strategy they're going to use. but I could see Dickinson taking advantage of the freshman in the front court and using that in a way to get him off the floor, to get him in foul trouble, to get some easy points at the free throw line and kind of take advantage there. So I think this is going to be an incredibly exciting game. There are hundreds of different storylines we could look at with this one. As for the Players Era games, I think I get your point on Bama. They just haven't played all that consistently this year, which is kind of concerning for me against a Houston team that is so disciplined and consistent in the way that they typically play. But I think Bama's got more talent, so I could see that winning out in this one. But those are going to be two incredible games. That's not to take away from the other games. I'm not super pumped about Rutgers Notre Dame. I think that's fair to say that the way those two teams looked in their most recent games. Oregon A&M, complete wild card. I really don't have a good sense of that game. San Diego State Creighton is going to be a blast. That's a really fun game between two fun teams who both are down a little bit, but I think are both good enough. I think they're evenly matched, and I think that's what's going to make that one fun. So a lot of great games to watch tonight. We'll be back with you all on Wednesday, recapping these games, getting you ready for the start of the battle for Atlantis and all the other fun stuff coming your way on Feast Week. But folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. I want to thank all of you for making the show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Once again, we'll be back with you tomorrow, talking about all these games we're previewing, getting you ready for the rest of the week. Thanks again for listening, folks. And until next time, as always, peace out.